Target 9. I think we're going to have quite a big group here today, so that's awesome. Hopefully you guys will learn a lot and have lots of opportunities to jump in with your questions and comments and participate in today's session. So hello to everyone from all over the world. I know we have people listening from all over the place. So if you're just joining us, feel free to use your questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. You can type in anything you like. Lots of people are introducing themselves and letting us know where they are listening from. And unfortunately, we can't share the comments or the questions box with everyone. We don't have a way to do that, but I will see it. And I have two colleagues on the line also at the moment who will be able to see your comments as well, John and Cameron. So all of us say hello and welcome, and feel free to use that anytime to introduce yourself and say hi. And I'm recognizing a lot of you. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names today, so welcome back to everyone who's saying hi. Here we go, CELPIP Writing Pro, Target 9. Okay, so we'll start with an introduction, and for anybody who has attended sessions in the past, you have probably memorized this slide already, but for anybody who is new, we'll let you know that your microphones are muted because we have so many people and we just don't have the ability to have everybody on the line speaking out loud. So I will have my microphone on and everybody else will be muted. And as I mentioned, and as many of you have already figured out, you can use the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel to make comments, ask questions anytime. We don't have a set time for questions, so feel free to say anything you like at any time that it pops into your head. And if it's something that will help everybody in the group, I will read it out loud and respond to you that way. And if it's something a little more personal or specific, my colleague will answer it by text for you. So we will try our very best to get to everybody's questions. If you have technical issues, hopefully you won't, but if you do, the classic solution is to log out and log back in, and that's absolutely fine. You're not going to lose your spot or anything like that. You'll still be able to get into the session. And also, if you're not using Chrome as your browser, that's something you can try. We find that it works best with the GoToWebinar program. If you'd like to take notes, of course, you're very welcome to do that. You can either do it the old-fashioned way with a paper and a pen, or you can simply take screenshots. And I think GoToWebinar makes that very simple. And after the session, just to let you know, you're going to get an email with lots of stuff in it. So first thing it will have is a survey link, which is something that we encourage you to fill out because this is a brand new webinar. This is only the second time we've run it. So I'm still working on making improvements to the slides and things like that. So if you have any comments or ideas or suggestions or compliments or anything you want to say, you can do that in the survey. Also, you will receive a link to a Target 9 study pack, which is actually quite a large document with lots of helpful information, including all of the main strategies and all of the sample responses and response analysis that we do today. So you don't have to take screenshots of all of that because you're going to get a document that has that information already. And I will mention also that the email today includes a link to the video of today's session. So if you have to miss part of it for any reason, if you step away or fall asleep or you have to go, it's okay. You're going to get a link to the session, so you'll be able to review it anytime that works for you. So let's go. This is me. My name is Megan, and I've been here at Paragon Testing Enterprises for, well, in the office for about 7 months, but with the company since the summer of 2013. I started off as a writing rater, and I rated over 30,000 CELPIP writing responses over the next 5.5 years or so. So I do have a lot of experience with CELPIP and with CELPIP writing in particular. And I'm also a writer myself, so I've studied all kinds of things, mostly dead languages and creative writing, and also English teaching. So this webinar is a good sort of intersection of all of my skills and interests. So hopefully I'll be able to help you out with the writing test today. Just to explain to everyone, since we do have two new webinars, we have Writing Pro Target 5 and we have Writing Pro Target 9. So this is Target 9, and this slide just shows you a few of the key differences between the two. Target 9 goes a little bit quicker. It assumes that you already kind of know the basics, and we're going to have sample responses that are a little bit higher level, so they will be from level 8 to 12. And we're going to go a little bit faster and a little more in depth into really how to take a response that's pretty good and push it up to the next level. And hopefully you will get the level 9 that most of you are looking for. Some people wonder if I'm not looking for a level 5 or a level 9. Maybe you want a 7 or something else. That's fine. You're still welcome to be here. All of the information still applies to you and to everyone. So you're welcome to stay, and you're also welcome to attend a Target 5 session where we go through the basics in more detail. So feel free to attend both, and you will definitely learn some things that are relevant to you. Okay, so for today's session, we're going to start with just an overview of tasks 1 and 2 of the writing test, and we'll talk about what you're going to be able to see on the screen and the tools that you will have available to work with when you take your writing test, and we'll talk a little about scoring as well. We'll go into task 1 and do some response analysis. We'll look at some real test taker responses and talk in detail about what level they're at and maybe some improvements and suggestions. And we'll finish off with some key skills and strategies for task 1, which is writing an email. And then we'll do the same thing for task 2, responding to a survey question. And part 4 is a little workshop. So we're going to take a sample and we're going to talk about how to improve it in each dimension. There are 4 different dimensions, different categories that raters look at when they are rating CELPIP writing responses, and we're going to go dimension by dimension and suggest improvements for each. Finally, we will talk about some study materials that we have available for anyone who may be interested in that. So let's get going. First of all, our writing test overview. So everybody has probably become aware of these facts already, just because if you have a test, you probably looked into it a little bit, but this is an overview of the writing test. So for both tasks, you have quite a bit of time, 27 minutes for task 1 and then 26 for task 2, so almost the same. Length is the same for each. Writing is the 3rd skill that you will be tested on CELPIP. So listening starts the test, and then reading, and then writing. And then after the writing, you'll do the speaking part. The writing test takes about an hour to complete. As you can see, 26 plus 27 minutes is roughly 1 hour. The word count range is the same, and the questions are going to be everyday situations, community situations, workplace situations. You will not be expected to talk about anything extremely personal or controversial or anything that requires you to bring in any kind of specialized knowledge. And that includes knowledge about Canada. So all of these questions are general, and you can bring your own background knowledge and information to them, and you'll be able to respond to them with that. Task 1, first, I just want to briefly go through the sort of the key points of each question type. So we'll do tasks 1 and 2. And for anyone who asks questions during this part, I'm not ignoring you. If I don't get to your question, it's because probably you're asking something that is coming up in the session, and I know that I'm going to be answering it soon. So I want to go through this part kind of quickly so that we have lots of time to talk about sample responses, and your questions will be answered as we go. So if we look at task 1, first of all, it's very important to read both sides of the screen. So what you see on the left will be background information about the situation, And then on the right, you'll get your instructions and the tasks you have to complete. And in order to fully answer the question, you need all of that information. Complete all of the tasks, and in task 1 they'll be in bullet point form, and they're going to be 3 or 4 tasks to complete, and you should complete them in your own words. So don't borrow a lot of words and phrases from the question. Do everything you can to restate things in your own words and explain them in your own way. Word count, it says always about 150 to 200 words, and that basically means you have a little bit of wiggle room on each side. Don't go over by more than 20 words and don't go under by more than 15. That's when it's going to start having a negative impact on your score. So absolutely do not write over or under those specified limits. And task 1 is not an essay question, it's an email. It's always going to say write an email. The task is called writing an email, and an email is not an essay. And it's also not a business letter, it's an email, right? So one thing raters look for is whether the test taker is answering the question in full and with appropriate information. And the best way to do well with that is to simply follow the instructions. That's an easy way of raising your chances of getting a higher level score. Simply following the instructions and using a tone that's appropriate for an email as opposed to an academic essay or a very formal business letter, that's going to help you. So consider the situation. And for task 1, there's going to be a range of situations that are possible, different levels of formality, and you should use the one that's appropriate for that context. Task 2 is always responding to a survey question. So somebody is sending out a survey and they're asking for your opinion, and you're going to choose between 2 options and explain why you prefer your choice. And again, there will be information on both sides of the screen, on the left and the right, and it's all important and you need to read all of it. Same word count range and same rules about that. Don't go more than 20 words over or 15 words under. That's a very strict limit. The computer's counting word count, so it knows if you're over or under. This is not an essay question. So task 2, a lot of people get into the trap of, oh, I'm going to write an essay, but don't, because you don't have time. You only have 150 to 200 words roughly, and that's not enough time not enough space to write an essay. And it's also not an academic situation, right? It's not your professor asked you to write an essay. It's, in this case, the city's asking for your opinion about something. So it's not an essay question. Don't write a 5-paragraph essay. You really just don't have time. You're going to go way over the word limit if you do that, and your tone is going to be very strange. It's going to be too academic, and so you're going to lose points for not following the instructions. So don't do it. We will talk about what to do as we go through our sample responses and do some analysis for task 2. What you do want to do is to give reasons for your choice. So you're going to choose between those 2 options, and you are going to explain why you prefer your choice. Why is it better than the other choice? So it's a comparison. You're giving reasons to support your choice, and reasons should be your main ideas. So other kinds of information like suggestions or descriptions may be usable when they serve as strong supporting details, but your main ideas are going to be reasons. Why is option A the best option, or why is option B better? You can compare the 2, so you can say why your choice is better, and you can also explain maybe the problems with the other choice if that is appropriate. So you can do both. It's always a comparison, right? Because you're saying why something is better, and better is a comparative word. Prefer is, I think one thing is better than the other. So always task 2 is going to be a comparison. Okay. We got through that. So let's have a look at what you're going to see on the screen. First of all, your time clock is in the top right, and it will always be there all through the test. In the case of the writing test, It's probably going to be less stressful for you than in some of the other tasks where you only have 30 seconds or 1 minute or something like that. But in the writing test, you have a long time, and that's great. I'm going to talk about ways to use that time as we go through today. So as you can see, this person has just started task 1, and beside your time clock is your next button. With the next button, you only want to click it if you finish before the time is up and you are 100% sure that you are finished and you're ready to move to the next task. Once you click next, you cannot go back. So don't do it if you're not sure. Just stay, wait, check your work, whatever you want to do. You can use the full time. There's nothing wrong with using the full time. In fact, I think it's a good thing to do. If you do click next, you're not going to bring that time with you to the next task. So if you finish task 1 in 23 minutes, you're not going to be bringing those additional 4 minutes into task 2 so that you have more time for task 2. That's not how it works. So the only advantage to clicking next is you're going to finish the test a little bit faster. So if you don't want to click it, don't. Just leave it alone. You never ever on the CELPIP test have to click next. So some people never do, and that's absolutely fine. You have a word counter, and you'll see it below your text box, and you should see it now outlined in red on your screen. It's going to tell you how many words you wrote, so you don't have to count. There is a spell check. It's going to underline misspelled words in red, so much like if you are familiar with Microsoft Word, that's the kind of thing it's going to look like. However, it's not going to underline a misspelling if that misspelling is also a word in English. So, for example, if you write staff and you meant to say stuff, the spell check is not going to catch that. So you still need to pay attention to those, and that's something to watch for when you check your work at the end. Are all of these words the words that I meant to type? Because it's very easy to make those kinds of mistakes, and everybody does that stuff all the time. So check your work at the end and make sure you're not making any unnecessary errors. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about scoring. People always wonder, who are these raters and what are they looking for? Raters are just people who receive training in reading CELPIP writing responses and applying a particular set of criteria to every single response. And they do that just so that everyone gets rated in the same way. And the criteria that you're seeing on your screen now are the ones that the raters think about. And so there are 4 categories that raters consider when they're reading every writing response. The first one is content and coherence. That essentially means how organized is your response and how well developed are the ideas. Is it easy to follow along? Are the ideas developed clearly and precisely? Are you expressing precise meaning? And are you expressing an appropriate number of different ideas? And there's no set number of ideas. Nobody is counting your ideas, but it's important that you have many different ideas in a response of this length, right? That you're not repeating yourself. The quality of your ideas, of course, is important. Are they superficial or are they really deep and relevant to the situation? And are you carefully developing those with clear details and support? Organization is a huge thing in this dimension. And so structure is part of that. So how easy is it to follow along without any effort? And that's what you want. You want your response to just flow really nicely and clearly for somebody who's reading it. The next category is vocabulary, and that is all about the way you choose and use your language. So word choice, is it suitable? Does it fit the situation? Are the words and phrases that you're using appropriate for the context, and are they precise for that situation? Are you using a range of different words and phrases, so not repeating the same word or the same phrase over and over again as you write? Are you using language in a way that is as precise and accurate as it can be? So expressing exactly the meaning that you want to say. And that really requires having a very deep understanding of the language and how different words are used in different situations and with different other verbs and all of that. So things like phrases in English where words and other words just naturally come together and there's no real reason for it, but that's how we do it. For example, we say in English, brush your teeth. We don't say, we don't say like clean your teeth or something like that. And there's no reason for it. That's just what we say here in Canada. So things like that comes into vocabulary. Is it natural? Does it read like a natural English speaker would say? Readability is the third category, and this is the category that everyone thinks is the most important because it includes grammar. And I will tell you, it is not the most important. There is no most important. So readability is important, of course, but every other category is as important as readability. So readability includes formatting and paragraphing. So the way that the response looks and is structured on the page, and that has a huge impact, whether it's positive or negative. Connectors and transitions, are you showing your ability to connect ideas and create flow using those different words, like first of all, or for example, or with this in mind, or anything like that. There's tons and tons of different transition words and phrases, and your use of those is something that raters are considering. Grammar and sentence structure are included in readability as well. Everyone knows what grammar means, and it's very easy for me to say your grammar should be good, and it's harder for you to do that as a language learner, but that is something that is considered within this dimension. As far as sentence structure goes, it's important to show what you're capable of, right? This is a test and you're showing your ability. And so what you want to do on this test is make sure that you're demonstrating everything that you're able to do, which means different types of sentences. You may want to have some complex sentences. You may want to have some conditionals. You may want to have a question. You may want to have longer and shorter sentences. Whatever the situation calls for, try to include a variety of different structures because you're showing when you do that you're capable of it. And then the raters will know and they'll be able to give you credit for that. Last thing is spelling and punctuation. Both are important. You do have the spell check, which is helpful, but there is no punctuation check. So you should be using periods and commas very accurately to get a level 9. You really shouldn't be making a lot of punctuation errors at that level. So all of those things come together, and if you do them well, your response will be very easy to read and will be easy to understand, and the reader won't have to do a lot of work. It'll just be very easy for them to read. Our last category is task fulfillment, and that essentially means, did you follow the instructions? This is easy to do well for most people at most levels. This is something that you have the ability to score very highly in, and so something that you should pay attention to because it's one of the easiest things. It really doesn't even require that much knowledge of English. You just have to really be sure that you're answering the question as well as you can. So that includes things like relevance and completeness. So are your ideas on topic? Do they make sense in the context of the situation? And are they developed as fully as they should be for that situation? Is anything missing? Is anything obviously not clear? And you want the answers to those questions to be no. You want everything to be there that needs to be there. Tone is something that a lot of second language speakers worry about. I would say a little bit too much because in terms of tone, that just means making the right word choice for the situation. And we all do that every day. When we talk to different people, we choose different words. And when we write to our friends, we write a little bit differently than if we were writing to apply for a job. And that's just natural in every language. So imagine the situation is real. Imagine it's really happening. How would you really communicate with that person? if you consider that and if you write accordingly, you should be fine. Tone is not some special cultural thing that is magical or you have to live in Canada to understand. It's just simply choosing words that suit the context. And most people are already quite good at that. So it's not something to worry about too much. Word count is the last thing that's included in task fulfillment. So that's where it's going to have a negative impact if you go way over or way under the word count. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions and I'm kind of surprised. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If not, we'll just keep going. Usually the questions box is just scrolling with comments. Okay, no, okay. Well, if you do have anything to say, you know where to say it. Okay, so just our last our second last slide on scoring, and this is a slide where you can kind of see where level 9 is in relation to the other CELPIP levels. So level 9 is very high. It's in terms of the CLBs, the Canadian Language Benchmarks, which are associated with and aligned with CELPIP levels. Level 9 is the beginning of sort of the advanced range of knowing English, and that is tough. It's tough to get to that level of fluency. It's simply just very difficult. A lot of people get to sort of an 8 and they find it really, really hard to push themselves into that next level. And it's not because they aren't trying or not working hard. It's just language learning is hard and it's hard to get there. It's not impossible, but a lot of people find they're doing a lot of work and they're not seeing the kind of results that they used to see as far as their grades or their scores. And so try not to get discouraged, but that's something to be aware of. Level 9 is really a high degree of fluency. And this webinar is unfortunately not going to provide a list of quick tips that will guarantee you a level 9. Those tips don't exist. Level 9 is a reflection of your language ability and your language knowledge and your fluency and your comprehension. And those are only things that can be developed over time. So we're going to talk about the things the raters look for and ways that strengths and weaknesses can impact your response. But there really are no tricks. The only way to learn a language is to practice and practice and practice. And unfortunately, that's reality. So learning about the test is important, and you're definitely in the right place for that. And it increases your confidence and it helps you to focus your preparation. But really, what's going to help you is improving your language skills and finding ways to do that. So this is here's our level 9. It's high on the ladder for sure, and we do understand that. Okay, so as full as scoring, we have some new aspects of our score reports that will be coming out. So when a test taker takes the CELPIP test, they receive a score report, and these are some features that I'm not actually sure if they are currently part of the score reports, but they will be very soon if they're not already. So we're just letting people know, if you see these things on your score report, this is sort of what they're all about. So they're a new feature of score reports, and there are 3 parts. There is a performance profile, and that's not personalized. It goes by level. So if you receive a level 9 in writing, you will receive the performance profile that you see on your screen. So a level 9 in writing is that you can write short, organized texts in most contexts. You have control of complex grammar, which basically means you're pretty good at it and you're not making a lot of errors, even when the grammar is complex. Developing a repertoire of precise, formal, and specialist vocabulary. So again, you're not perfect with your vocabulary, but you're demonstrating that you're close to that. You're on the way. You can write longer and more demanding texts. And when you make errors, it's occasional, and they don't impede your meaning. So you may make mistakes here and there, but we can still understand what you're trying to say without effort. So that's what a level 9 looks like. And if you get a level 9, you'll get that paragraph. Can-do statements are sort of individual statements that somebody at each particular level is capable of, and it goes by dimension. So there would be 2 or 3 can-do statements for content and coherence, for example, and then there would be 1 or 2 for vocabulary, and they're sort of just breaking down the performance profile a little bit more. So you will see those on our website shortly, and also in your score reports. If not now, then certainly soon. And everyone will also be receiving a list of things to work on. And again, it's not personalized, so it's things that a typical test taker at that level might be wise to consider working on in order to bump themselves up to the next level. So some of them will probably apply, and some of them may not. It just really depends on the test taker because everybody is different. Okay, so I want to stop here. We have some questions now, so I'm just going to read my questions box quickly, and then I will respond to many of you have asked some questions, so we'll just give me 5 seconds here, and then I'll get back to you. Okay, so Maria is asking about what kind of connectors and transitions should we use to score a CLB 9? Well, I don't have a list of level 9 connectors and transitions, but I think what happens if you're in that sort of advanced level 9 and higher area is that you're using transitions with intention, and you're using them to communicate precise meaning. So somebody who is maybe not a level 9, who may be a lower level, has probably learned that when you have 3 main ideas, you could go firstly, secondly, and lastly. And then you could say in conclusion and write your conclusion. And that would be absolutely fine. And those transitions would be helpful, and they would be appropriate for the situation if you were writing something with that number of main ideas, like a survey response. But it wouldn't really add a lot of depth to the response. It wouldn't really show a sophisticated way of creating flow. So I think I can't provide a list of connector examples that would be appropriate for level 9 because it really depends on the situation and what you're trying to say. But we are going to see some sample responses today where people are doing well and maybe not so well at using transitions, and so that'll be something we do talk about. Okay, let's see. Rahul, you're asking if you've taken the test, is it possible for someone to know in which section out of those 4 they are lacking? So if you take the test, is there a way to know, say, oh, readability is my main problem or content and coherence is my main problem? I think that's what you're asking. And the answer is no. You're not going to get in your score report something that says you did X well in content coherence and you did better in vocabulary. You're not going to receive that kind of information. So that's why it's important to get to know yourself and your writing beforehand, and knowing these criteria going in should help you. But no, unfortunately, it's not going to tell you where you messed up if you messed up somewhere. Darren, you're asking, how come we don't give tips for getting a level 9? Most native speakers get an 8 and are confused why. Well, we don't have specific tips because there's no trick to it. There's no tips to it. I think a lot of native speakers do score lower than they expect to and score lower than they could have. And as far as giving tips, I think that's what this webinar is doing. And certainly the performance standards that I mentioned earlier are available on the website. And so you can go in knowing the criteria that are being assessed, and you can work on those things. Certainly as a native speaker, you should be able to achieve, well, most native speakers would be able to achieve a level 9 if that's what they were looking for. But they would have to make an effort. It's something that you're still going to have to do your very best work in order for that to happen. And I've certainly read responses where I could tell this person is a native speaker, but they also clearly are not doing their best work because they think that being a native speaker is in itself enough to get the highest score, and that's just not true. Everybody is assessed according to the same rubric, and we're not supposed to make assumptions about who's a native speaker or how long they've been studying English, because that's really not fair. So as far as tips go, I would say that that performance standards chart is a huge tip, and doing your absolute best work and using language precisely and demonstrating your capabilities is the rest of the tips. Let's see. Nanad is asking, do you need to cover almost all tenses? No, there's no rule about how many verb tenses you use or anything like that. It's really about naturalness and accuracy and appropriateness. So nobody's going through and checking off a checklist which verb tenses you used or anything like that. That's not how people write, right? So no, we're not doing that. But if, for example, some people write in very short sentences and every single sentence is just really short, or they write in extremely, extremely long sentences that are very difficult to understand because they aren't very good at using punctuation. And so they're not really demonstrating their capabilities if they're only sort of relying on the same kind of grammar over and over again. So we really just mean show a variety of sentence types as opposed to just relying on one or two. Okay, we got to keep going. So let's go to task 1, which is writing an email. So I have some questions for you. The first question, so we're going to look at this one a lot. We're going to be looking at this sample response that you see at the top of your screen for the rest of our discussion of task 1 today. So if you don't have a chance to read it thoroughly right now, that's okay. You're going to be seeing it again and again. True or false for this question? If you write 175 words, you will get a lower score than someone who writes 200 words. True or false? We have responses coming in. Nobody is saying true, which I am grateful for because you are all correct. Yeah, the answer is false. It's impossible to say. It's possible you'll get a lower score. It's also possible you'll get a higher score. Word count isn't deciding anybody's score. All of those criteria together are your score. And so absolutely not the case that more is better. More developed is better, and more clear and a better range of vocabulary is better, but word count in itself is not going to decide anything for you. How about number 2, true or false? Dear sir or madam would be an appropriate greeting for this task. So you read the question and decide if 2 is true or false. This one is a little more difficult. Most of you are coming in with the correct answer. Some of you are coming in with the reason why you chose what you did, which is great, and you are correct. Yeah, so the vast majority of you are saying false, and that is correct. And we had somebody write in, let me see if I can find it, Nanad and Paul, and I think there's somebody else. Oh, I missed it. I thought there was somebody else, but in any case, it is false, and it's false because you know that you're writing to, first of all, you know you're writing to a woman because the word her is in the question, but also you know who the person is because it's a famous writer who's very popular in your classroom. Dear sir or madam is when you have no idea who's going to read your letter or your email. Obviously, you know who's going to read it if you are writing it to a very specific person. So, dear sir or madam would not be an appropriate greeting. You would probably, I mean, you could say dear madam, that would be very formal, but you could. Or I would probably say dear Ms. and then their last name, their surname. I think that would be the most common way of approaching that. Number 3, true or false, you don't need to include a to, a from, or a subject line. Most of you are nailing it. Yes, that is true. And not only do you not need to, you really shouldn't. Don't spend time doing that. It is unnecessary. just write your email. You don't need to make it look like an email on the page. There's absolutely no need to do that. And you're not going to get a better score if you do it, and you're not going to get a worse score if you don't. It's just not important. It's not considered at all. So start with your greeting. Dear Ms. Whatever, or hi, whatever. Start there. Don't worry about these other things. So get right to your email and right into developing your response. Okay, so this question is on the screen just because we're going to be looking at it over and over again. We're going to do some response analysis. So here it is, just so that everybody has it. I'm going to read to you the whole question once, and then we're going to go through some sample responses. So on the left, we have you are an elementary school teacher. There is a famous writer who lives near your school. And then on the right, in about 150 to 200 words, write to this writer and invite her to speak to the children in your class. Your message must include the following points: an introduction to the school and your class, why the children like this writer's books, an invitation to visit the classroom, and what the writer can do with the children. So this question is going to be important for the rest of our discussion of task 1. And we have our first sample response here. So I'm going to be quiet for about a minute. I'm going to give you an opportunity to read and think about what are the strengths and weaknesses that you see here. What are they doing well? What are they not doing so well? Think about those performance standards that we talked about. And if you want to try guessing their level, you can do that as well. And just type that into the questions box, anything that you want to say about this response. Strengths, weaknesses, and level. Okay, so some ideas are starting to come in. A few level guesses. So some of the comments that I'm seeing so far, Somi is saying the purpose should be at the first line, and we can definitely talk about that. Ling is suggesting a grammar correction inspired you to write. Elena is saying the person hasn't read the task thoroughly because they said Dear Mr. instead of Ms. And that they're also struggling with grammar, which is true. There are quite a few grammar errors throughout. Oluwatosin is saying spelling and verb tenses in particular. A lot of guesses for level 8 here. And I will tell you, this is a level 7. I would say it's a pretty high level 7. Of course, there's always a range, and when you've read a lot of responses, you can kind of say this is on the low end or the high end. This to me is on the high end. So some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses, let's go through those. So some of the strengths, and just before I start, I'll remind you that all of these sample responses that we talk about and all of the analysis will be included in your study pack. So you're going to see everything I'm about to say, you're going to have it in words, and you're also going to have this response. So you'll be able to look at it more carefully if you like after the session. So we do have some clear main ideas, and they are supported with details. And as far as content and coherence goes, that's great. Some of the word choice is precise and clear. For example, literature teacher. Simple to understand, that is a very natural expression. Process of writing, very natural as well. Inspired is a good verb. Paragraphing and formatting are definitely making the response easier to read. So in terms of readability, that's a plus. And the writer does address all 4 tasks. So task fulfillment, they've done pretty well there. In terms of weaknesses, some of the details aren't very precise. For example, who are these students? What grade are they in? What book are they reading? Why exactly do they enjoy the book? What is it about the book that they like? For many of the tasks, we could really use more detail. We don't learn a lot about the school or the class or why the kids like the books. And so we can tell the writer's trying to address the tasks, but it's not really very thorough the way that they're approaching it. And there are some grammar mistakes, as many of you have noticed, and some of them create problems with meaning. For example, the phrase in the 3rd paragraph, I think this meeting will be useful for those who is interesting for everyone. I really don't understand the intended meaning there. That's really so grammatically incorrect that I'm actually confused and I can't really translate it. So that happens occasionally. And on the whole, I would say this is a strong level 7, and for the reasons that I mentioned. Oh, Wei is asking, is the time expression right or wrong? 7 to 9 a.m. Oh, because they didn't put periods after A. Oh, so they have between 9 to 11 a.m., but they kind of wrote it as am, like I am. Yeah, it's better to put the periods. A period, M period would be better. Yes, I understand the meaning here. So that's an example of an error that is an error, but it doesn't really affect my ability to understand the meaning. So yes, and faithfully yours, somebody's asking about, that's an absolutely fine sign off. That's quite formal. It's very polite. And in the context of talking to somebody for the first time and asking them for a favor, I think that it works just fine. So I think that the sign off is absolutely fine. And as somebody pointed out, we do have this person writing to a male writer, not a female writer. That is not a big deal. It would be better if it was a female writer, but again, it's not going to cause them to lose an entire level or anything like that. That's a very minor error, and it wouldn't come into a rater's mind at all until they're thinking about task fulfillment. And even there, it's so minor that it's not a big deal. So it is something to notice, but it's not something to worry about too much if you make a little mistake like that. Okay, we have a new response here. This is our second one. And again, I'm going to give you a minute to read through it. Think about what level this person might have received. Strengths and weaknesses, anything you see that you would like to comment on. Think about those performance standards that we talked about in those 4 categories. I'll give you a minute and then we'll chat. Okay, we have some comments and some ideas coming in. Um, well, everybody agrees that this test taker's response is a higher level than the previous one, which is absolutely true. Most of you are saying between levels 10 and 12. The majority of you are saying level 10. This is, yeah, Price is saying more than 10. This is actually a level 12. So to me, this is a pretty good level 12. We have some occasional errors, but you don't have to be perfect to get a level 12. What's really good about this one is the precision and the clarity. And also, we had somebody was mentioning the readability is great, which I agree with as well. So there really aren't very many weaknesses for this one. They got a level 12, so that's not surprising, not very many weaknesses. We do have a few tiny mistakes. The phrase followed by some questions at the end isn't very clear. I understand the meaning, but it's not very clear who's going to ask the questions or anything like that. So it's just a little strange. Motive in the final paragraph is the wrong form. It should be motivate. And there's not very many transitions here, but lots of sentences are kind of on the shorter side. But that's sort of, there's many ways to write something, and there's no correct way. And this person hasn't used a lot of transitions, but they've used some. And the lack of transitions isn't causing any meaning problems, right? I'm not having trouble following the ideas. And that's where transitions are important. And if you don't have them, it becomes a problem. If it's impossible to follow the ideas because there's no transitions, that's where a rater's going to start thinking about it. Here, I didn't really notice until I really started thinking about it for the purpose of this webinar that this person wasn't using a lot of transitions. So I don't think it's a big deal here. In terms of task fulfillment, it's a little vague. They say a 20-minute talk, but they don't really say why or what kind of talk or what they're going to talk about. And in terms of the invitation, they say in the coming weeks, which is a really long stretch of time if you're inviting somebody somewhere. You might want to be a little more specific about when you would like them to come, or a time of day, or anything would be helpful. The coming weeks is very vague, but on the other hand, we have a lot of specific details here. We have a book title, we have a school name, we have a detail about the school, which is the pink mural. We know exactly where the school is. We have details that are relevant to the situation. These are the kinds of things you would say and point out if you really were in this situation, and it's very vivid. It's very realistic, and it's very precise. It's not general. It feels like this person is talking about a specific school. And then in the second paragraph, the same thing. The kids are huge fans. They're third graders, so we've now learned about the school, and we've learned about the class. They're clever, they're funny. We know exactly which book they just read, and we know exactly what part of the book was funny and how the kids reacted. So this is much more precise than the previous example, and it's also really strong in terms of clarity and vividness and realisticness. So the writer does address all of the tasks, and they do a very good job of a couple of them. And we do have a couple small errors or arguable weaknesses, but overall, this response is great, and it is a level 12. Okay, we're going to keep moving. Simply just for time, I want to make sure we can get through as many things as we need to. So we'll get our final response here that we're going to look at for task 1. And we're going to look at this one super carefully. We're going to look at it dimension by dimension. We're going to consider each of the 4 dimensions and talk about it in detail. So I'll give you just a minute to look at it, and then it's going to stay on the screen as we discuss it. So if you don't get all the way through it now, no worries. Just give it a look and have a think, and then we'll go through it by dimension. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. It'll still be there for you. So there's our response again, and I've included the important factors for the content and coherence dimension. So those 4 things the raters are thinking about when they are assessing content and coherence. So let's look at the questions at the bottom of the screen, and I hope everybody can see 2 questions. Sometimes the slides, the writing is too low for everyone to see, so I hope that's not the case here. Let's look at, first of all, question 1. Is the writer's purpose clear? What do you think? Range of answers here. Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. A lot of people, I think, especially if you attended the Target 5 session a couple days ago, I recommended stating your purpose right at the beginning, and this person doesn't do that. However, I would say that her purpose is pretty clear. She does state it at the beginning in the first paragraph, and then she elaborates on it again. And then even at the end, she says, let me know your thoughts, which is really inviting this person to respond and let us know if she's going to come to our class. So to me, I think the purpose is clear enough. I'm not confused about what the point of this email is. I understand why she's writing. So I would say some people prefer to state their purpose right at the beginning, and that's fine. This writer has taken a little bit of a different approach. She's introduced herself in the school first and then stated her purpose at the end of the first paragraph, which is also fine. It's an absolutely acceptable way to go. So I don't think she's done anything wrong here. It's pretty clear to me that this is an invitation. As far as main ideas, number 2, I'm going to say that, yeah, the main ideas are, first of all, the invitation and why the students enjoy the books and what the writer can do with the students in the classroom. And we have 3 paragraphs and we have sort of 3 main ideas. All of them are supported with details. And so, yes, I would say for question 2, yes, the ideas are supported with details, right? There's nothing here that is sort of there and you don't understand what it's doing there. All of those details really connect to those main ideas. So still looking at content and coherence, do you think there are enough different ideas? Does it feel like there's enough different ideas in this response? Everyone is saying yes. Some of you are saying yes with a question mark. I agree. I think there are many different ideas. There are tons of details. There's not a lot of repetition. There is some, and we'll talk about that when we get to that part. But on the whole, this is enough different ideas to have in your response. And as far as question 4 goes, I think that the organization is helpful. I don't have a difficult time following most of this because the organization is pretty clear. I would say that at the end, it gets a little bit muddled. Let me know your thoughts, and then thank you for your time, and then kind regards. You sort of have 3 sign-offs there. Really, thank you for your time should be up there with let me know your thoughts, and it should just have a period after it. And it shouldn't be like a sort of second sign-off. It gets a little confusing there. But on the whole, I would say that it's very well organized. So I would say this test taker did a very good job in content and coherence. If I was rating this, I would give it a very good score in content and coherence because I think they've really done all the things that we're asking. So we'll talk about vocabulary. Oh, Sally's asking, whether there are many ideas. What do I mean? I just mean many different ideas. And I think that it's hard to see in this example what I mean, probably because this person has included a different idea in every single sentence. And if you look at some lower level examples, you will see test takers who don't do that, who are repeating a lot of ideas or who have sort of surface level ideas that they're really not developing very well or at all, or they're jumping between ideas, so there's really no coherence. So if you were to see a lower level example, I think that that idea would make more sense, the number of ideas. Now here, I don't think it's something that a rater would really think about, because so clearly every sentence expresses a different idea, which is exactly what you want in a piece of writing. So yeah, I think it's hard to talk about number of ideas because this is a good response. But if you saw a lower level, you would probably understand it better. Okay, so let's talk about vocabulary. Vocabulary is word choice, and I will ask you question 1. Do you think this writer is using a wide range of words and phrases? Would you say yes, or would you say no? I don't see any no's. Everybody agrees. Yeah, absolutely. This writer is using a wide range of words and phrases. And let's look at question 2. Does anyone see any examples of word choice, of language use that is unclear, or maybe awkward, or repetitive? I do, if that helps. I see a few examples of that. So if anyone else does as well, you won't be wrong. It's hard, yeah, it's hard to cite, Yelena's saying, it's hard to cite specific examples in the moment, and that's why I made this slide. So what I did here is I put in green all of the language use that I think is especially clear and precise and natural. And I'm not saying that that's the only times when it's clear and precise and natural, but these are just ones that stood out to me as really well used words and phrases. And I put in red the ones that I think are repetitive or a little bit awkward or unclear. For example, this person says create or creation or creativity 5 times, I think. That's too much, especially in the first time where it says the creativity used to create. That's very awkward, and it's also repetitive, and it's not very clear. I'm unclear as to why they're using this word constantly, and I think this idea could have been expressed more precisely. So that's an example of repetition that's interfering a little bit, particularly in the last paragraph. Inspire somebody on is not really what we would say. It just doesn't go with that preposition. It just doesn't work. Create a fantasy word. Of course she means world, of course, right? That's a spelling error that didn't need to happen. But it happens to everyone all the time, right? Lots of people make that type of error. So that's why checking your work is so very important. She has said fantasy world twice, which is okay. It's a little repetitive, but it's a pretty specific phrase. It's not like she said book 9 times. Fantasy world is a higher level phrase. And then in the final sentence, that's where, to me, the vocabulary is getting a little bit imprecise. Please tell them. Well, describe to them or explain to them, or something better than tell would be a great word choice there. A more precise verb. And then we have create again, and then we have create again. And the ideas in that final sentence, even though there seem to be 3 ideas, tell them how you came to create Unicorn Land 1, what contributed to your creation 2, and how you put together the many adventures 3. That seems like 3 different ideas, but actually all 3 of those ideas have the same meaning. So it's a little bit repetitive and a little bit unclear. And that, I think, is something that maybe caused her to not get a perfect score for vocabulary. But overall, I would say that she did quite a good job. She did a very good job of vocabulary. Okay, so Sally is saying, I've mentioned sentences should have different ideas. So if you paraphrase a sentence using different vocabulary, should it be regarded as repetition of ideas? Well, if you paraphrase a sentence using different vocabulary and there's a good reason to do that, then absolutely not. That's totally fine. Or if there's a phrase in the question that you say in a couple different ways as you go through your response, that's no problem. But if you're repeating the idea for no reason, which some people do because they just can't think of a different way to say what they want to say, or they can't think of a new idea, that becomes obvious to a reader, and that becomes more of a problem. So repeating an idea in different words twice probably is absolutely fine, but I've seen a lot of responses where quite literally somebody will say the same thing 5 or 6 times. That's when it becomes very noticeable. So I would say, no, if you paraphrase something once, that's great, and especially if you paraphrase it, that's even better. So let's move on to readability. And first of all, what do you think about question 1? Is the response easier to read or harder to read because of the formatting? Is the formatting helping you, or is it impeding you? So far, we have many positive responses, and I totally agree. I think the formatting is excellent, and I'm thinking about the paragraphing and the way that everything is lined up on the left, and there's one sentence between each paragraph. It's very easy to follow that way. They're using punctuation correctly most of the time. We talked about that little glitch with "thank you for your time" with the comma, and then "kind regards" as a sort of second sign off. That's a little tiny readability problem, but it's not huge. So overall, formatting makes it much easier to read. Do we see any transition words? Do you see any transitions? Can anyone cite an example of a transition here? No examples coming in, and I kind of agree. Yeah, some people are saying no, but then most of you are just silent. It's hard to find transitions here. So they're not really using a lot of transition words. And again, it's not hard to follow the ideas, but there are opportunities to connect the ideas more strongly from time to time, especially in the last paragraph. The last paragraph needs a little help with clarity and precision, and possibly a transition could help there. It would simply be amazing if you could have actually connected that idea to the previous idea somehow, or to subsequent ones. So there are ways to make connections here that aren't happening. But again, nothing that's causing a huge problem. There's nothing where I say I don't understand because there's no transitions. So when I say that they're not using a lot of transitions, this is a minor point that I'm making. I'm not saying that it cost them any major points at all. And does anyone see any grammar errors here? Can you point any out? It's kind of, anyone have any grammar errors? Now, the fact that there aren't very many responses coming in the chat box is good news for this test taker, because for many responses, if I say, do you see any grammar errors, I will get flooded with messages because they're all over the place. This writer has not made a lot of grammar errors, and I would say they don't have an impact on understanding the ideas. I will show you some minor grammar errors that I noticed. And some of you pointed out the first one. My students are a huge fan. It should be my students are huge fans, right? So that's just a plural singular problem there, which is minor. I understand exactly what she's saying. If you could come would be much more natural, the next one. Inspire them on is just, I think I would reword that completely, because it's just a little bit, it's not natural, and you don't inspire somebody on something. You could maybe say about, but I would find a way to reword that completely. And then fantasy word, which is just simply, I think, a little spelling error, just a typo, really. I think she obviously meant to say fantasy world. So yes, we do have some grammar errors. We don't have very many, and they're not a big deal. Punctuation and spelling also are excellent. And I've underlined now 2 places where punctuation is a tiny problem. You don't want to have a question mark and then a period. You don't need that period there at all at the end of paragraph 2. Just take it out. And the thank you for your time, which we've talked about, should just have a period. And that whole sentence should really probably come up and be with, let me know your thoughts. Because the way that she has written it, it makes it look like a sign off. And then when she puts her real sign off, kind regards, then it's a tiny, tiny confusion. So yes, there are punctuation errors. No, they don't have a big impact on readability at all. So finally, we have task fulfillment, and that's our final category. And so I have on the screen, just to remind you, the 4 tasks that you have to complete for this question. So do you think she is addressing all 4 of these tasks? Everyone's saying yes, and I totally agree. She is addressing all of the tasks. Does she give enough information about each task, and is the information relevant? I think it depends on the task for me. I think the information about why the children like the writer's books is extremely well done, and the details are extremely helpful and realistic. And she did a pretty good job with the first task, introducing the class and the school. She could have said a little bit more. She could, for example, have mentioned what grade they're in, how many students, but she did address that task for sure. Inviting the writer to speak to the class, that's something that could be more precise too, which I've mentioned before. When you invite somebody, usually you would give a date or at least a range of dates, or maybe some times that would work, especially if you're a teacher. You're probably teaching this class at a particular time of day, and you could say, I have this class from 2:30 to 3 o'clock on Thursdays and Fridays. Would you be available to attend? So something like that. Invent a time, invent a day, even Monday through Friday, sometime in the afternoon would be more helpful than simply in the coming weeks, because that's or in the next 2 weeks, that's just a really long time. So also, again, the explanation of what the writer can do with the children could be a little bit more precise as well, and that's where she lists those 3 things, but all 3 of those things are the same meaning. So you didn't really have to say that 3 times. She could have had a different idea maybe instead of just repeating that one, or she could have elaborated on it a little bit more instead of just repeating it. So I will tell you overall, oh, sorry, we didn't talk about tone. And some of you asked about tone earlier. And so absolutely, the tone is very appropriate. It's very polite. It's formal, right? It's not too casual, but it's really friendly. She has an appropriate greeting. It's a little tiny bit strange to say dear with somebody's full name. I would probably say dear Ms. Miller. That's a tiny minor, I don't even know if problem is the right word. That's just something that I would notice as a native speaker. That's a little bit strange. And her sign off is fine, kind regards. That's always a fine sign off to use. So absolutely, the tone is excellent. And overall, this is a level 9, and I would say this is a very high level 9. And there's always a range. This to me is a very high level 9. So if you are anything close to this, I would say you're going to be fine. Okay, so let's just wrap up task 1. So in terms of an email, I think some of you did attend the Target 5 session a couple days ago, but just for everyone, so everyone kind of has this information. I don't want to go into it in detail because if you're close to a level 9, you probably know how to write an email. But if you are worried about that, if you're worried about structure, you can simply do this. Start with a greeting. Consider how formal and how familiar the situation is. Do you know the person well, and what is the context, and choose one that works in that situation. You can start with a purpose statement if you want. I would say if you don't start with it, you should have it in your first paragraph. It should occur pretty quickly so that you're not leaving the reader guessing all the way through what you want from them. So a purpose statement at or near the beginning. Why exactly are you writing this email? What's your main reason? Body paragraphs, that's where you're going to complete the tasks, and you can simply complete those tasks in order if you want to do that. The order that they're listed is always a fine order to complete them in. other people take a more creative approach, that's also fine. There's no correct way to do it, but for anyone who's sort of looking for a formula, you can do them in order, that's fine. Concluding statement is helpful, where you sum up your email or you let the person know what you want from them. So for example, in our level 9 that we just looked at, let me know your thoughts, I would say kind of works as a concluding statement. It's not super, super precise, but it makes it clear I'm waiting for a reply about what I just told you about. So it's telling the person what you want from them. And for task 1, that's often a good way to end. Sign off, if you just don't want to think about this and you always want to use the same one, kind regards or sincerely will work for any formal situation. And I'm not saying those are the only 2 you can use, because we've seen others even just today that are absolutely fine. Some people don't want to think about this. They worry about choosing an appropriate one. So if you are one of those people, you can always use kind regards or sincerely, and it will always be okay. More casual, if you're writing to a friend or somebody you know well, we very often use cheers in Canada. And so if it's a less formal situation, you can always use that one as well. And again, there are many more options. This is just one for people who don't want to have to think about it. Your signature, you can use a real name, you can use a fake name, you can use a funny name. It really doesn't matter. Nobody is judging the name. As long as there is a name there, it's fine. I have used some funny names in my sample responses in this webinar. It's fine. A lot of people do that, or they use a celebrity's name or something like that. So absolutely feel free to use any name that you like. It's not going to impact your score whatsoever if you use a fake name. Okay, so just quickly, I want to go through some key skills, and these are all going to be in your study pack, so I don't want to spend too much time on these because you'll have them and you'll be able to read them carefully. So for task 1, you want to make sure your response is organized, and then just on the right you have some strategies, some things you can make sure to do in order to achieve that. You want to support your main ideas. So in terms of that, one way to help yourself is to brainstorm before you start writing, and make sure you support each main idea with at least one specific detail. And to be specific, often it's going to be helpful if you talk about real places, real people, real situations. So the question's going to be pretty general. It's going to say an elementary school, a famous writer. Your job is to make it specific. So invent details. Choose a writer that you know about, or invent a fake person. You can do whatever you want. And so try to bring in those concrete ideas and make your response as vivid and realistic as you can. Vocabulary we've talked about, and the main point here is to avoid overusing words and phrases from the question, especially if you have a really good vocabulary. If you're a native speaker or close to it, you don't need to be using any extensive quoting or borrowing from the question. You can just use your own words, paraphrase, and state things in original ways to show the range of your vocabulary. Grammar and formatting. Starting a new paragraph for each main idea is a very easy way to improve your formatting. And connecting ideas with transitions is important. And capitalization and punctuation are also important. And with level 9, you should be doing that very well. Your grammar and your punctuation and your formatting should really be very good at that level. They should not be causing any interference with meaning or readability. Thorough response. So in terms of task fulfillment, read the whole question carefully. You have lots of time to do that. Read it carefully and brainstorm for a while, think of some good ideas, make yourself a little outline. You have time to do all of that. And so I would say take advantage of that time and be strategic about it. Don't change or ignore information from the question. So if it says you're an elementary school teacher, don't write about how you're a university teacher, because that's different, right? You're contradicting the question. So avoid that. Keep what the question says and incorporate that into your response. In terms of tone, I would say don't worry about it too much. If you're not being extremely rude or sarcastic, you're probably okay. For some people, they are a little bit too formal when they write, and so I would recommend maybe reading some real examples of writing by Canadians, whether it's emails or newspaper articles or magazine articles or anything, to see sort of levels of formality for different purposes, because I think in some countries, generally, the writing is a little more formal than it is in Canada. And so if you're worried about tone, that is something you can do, is just look into sort of typical ways of expressing yourself in correspondence in Canada. But if you're using common sense and you're not being rude or sarcastic, and you're thinking about who you're writing to, you're probably going to do okay. At the end, give yourself a few minutes, check your work. You have time to do this, and it's very, very strongly recommended, because everybody makes mistakes, and a lot of those mistakes are accidental, and you know better, and you could fix them. So give yourself time to do that, and that will be helpful. You won't have any of those unnecessary errors bringing your score down. Paul is asking, is it okay to use any idioms in any part of the writing task? Yes, it's okay. It's not necessary. It's okay. And I would say don't overuse them. We don't really use a lot of idioms in our everyday correspondence with people, right? So I would say some test takers they're at a sort of intermediate level, and they want to demonstrate how natural their English is, and so they'll include like 5 idioms in their writing. And that's actually quite distracting, and it's not super natural. It's just, we don't use them that often, right? So it's a little bit strange to see that many. But I would say it's not wrong if it works in the context and it's not too casual, or it's not sarcastic, or it's not unkind, then there's nothing wrong with that. But I would say probably keep it to a minimum. 1 idiom in an email is probably enough, really. I can't imagine a time when I would need to use more than that. Okay, we're going to move on to task 2, and we're going to go fast. So task 2, I have another question for you at the top of the page here, and this is the question that we're going to be talking about for our discussion of task 2. And so after this, I'm going to read it so that everybody has it for sure. But for now, I will ask you some true or false questions. So true or false? Take some time to just kind of skim the question, and then let me know what you think of question 1, true or false. You can include made up details about the hotel and the training in your response. Okay, the vast majority are saying true, and the vast majority are correct. It is true. You can, and you probably should, include some details about those things. Again, we have very general information in the question, and that's really just to make sure that the question is something that anyone in any situation can understand and then bring their own ideas to. They don't want to make it too specific, and then some people just won't understand or won't be able to respond. So your job on the test is to take that general information and to dress it up, decorate it with some specific details. And so absolutely you can make up details about the hotel. You can say what kind of job training it is. You can also make up details about the company or your boss or your personal life. So 100% true. How about number 2? You should write introductory and concluding paragraphs. This one tends to be a little more divided in the responses. I'm seeing about an equal number of trues and falses. And I think when I explain the answer, it'll make sense to those of you who didn't get it. I'm seeing some true with a question mark, maybe. Okay, so question 2 officially is false. You should not write introductory and concluding paragraphs because you don't have time. But you should write introductory and concluding statements. And 1 sentence, introduction and conclusion, is fine. Some people maybe have 2, depends on how you write. I would say avoid it being a whole paragraph because you just don't have time. It's not an essay question. And the majority of your time should be spent focused on developing your main ideas, which will be your reasons for your choice. So you should write introductory and concluding sentences, but probably not paragraphs. You just aren't going to have time for that. And how about number 3, true or false? It's going to strengthen your arguments if you express extreme positive or negative emotions for task 2. Everyone seems to agree about this, that it is false, and everyone is correct. Absolutely not. It will strengthen your arguments if you have good arguments that are supported with really good details. You don't want to be yelling rude things at your boss, and you don't also want to be overly complimentary and saying, "Thank you so much, sir," in every sentence, right? Because that's also not necessary, and it's really not helpful. You're not developing an argument when you do that. So focus on your ideas, explaining your position. Emotions, there's a point past which they're going to be helpful. So avoid being extreme in any way, I would say, for any question on any exam, really. That's never what they're asking for. So here is our writing task 2 question, and I'm going to read it to you just because we have some sample responses coming up, and I want to make sure everyone's familiar with the question. So on the left, we have vacation time or job training. You work in a small office. The boss wants to reduce vacation time by 2 days, but send everyone in the office to a nice beachside hotel for 4 days of job training. Some of the staff are very happy with this idea, others are upset. The boss asked you to respond to an opinion survey. So on the right, what you see in blue is always going to be the same for every question for task 2. So always it's going to say, choose the option that you prefer. Why do you prefer your choice? Explain the reasons for your choice. Write about 150 to 200 words. And then you have your 2 options. Option A, I think we should keep our vacation time instead of going to the training. Option B, I think we should do the training and cut back our vacation time. So now we're going to have a look at a sample response. So I'm going to do my usual thing. I'm going to turn off my mic for a minute. Have a look at this response. Think about the question, strengths, weaknesses, and if you would like to try guessing the level, you can do that as well. Any thoughts yet? Any guesses about level? Any thoughts about strengths or weaknesses or specific things that you notice that are good or not so good? quite a range of level guesses here. We're going, everything from level 6 to level 10 is being guessed here. Some people say it's not a 9. Oh, somebody feels very confident that it's not a 9. Some people are saying 10. Some people are saying maximum 7. Oh my gosh, okay. This is a level 10. So I'll let you recover from your shock, and then I'll explain why. So this is a level 10. This has already been rated, not by me, but it's a real response, and this writer got a level 10 for this response. First of all, I want to start with strengths. The writer chooses an option, which is the first thing you're supposed to do, and he actually uses his own words to express his choice. We have somebody saying I second is not right, but it actually is. When you say I second your suggestion, it means I agree with your suggestion. So that's actually fine, and that's actually quite natural. So I like that. I second your suggestion means I agree with you. And it's a little more, I wouldn't say it's an idiom, but it's definitely an expression. It's like figurative use of language, which is great if you're able to do that. So no problem with that. The first sentence definitely, when I first read the first sentence, I was like, oh, this is not going to be a high level, because reduce the number of vacations days and send us for a training really isn't great English. There are, I think, 4 grammar errors just in that half a sentence. So he doesn't start off strong. I will say that. But he gets better. He chooses an option, he uses his own words, and his vocabulary use is pretty good. Many of you have noticed that. He has lots of precise vocabulary that is very natural, like I second, like friends outside work, team lead, which is a very natural job-related phrase, overall decrease, very clear. In terms of grammar, we don't have a lot of grammar errors that really interfere with understanding. Past that first sentence, which I agree is not great, we don't really have a lot of grammar problems. So it's a kind of a bad start, but he got better. In terms of the formatting and the paragraphing, I would say that he does have 2 main ideas and that they are nicely separated. So we have 2 separate paragraphs there, and we have an introduction. We do have a conclusion. The second idea is not very well developed, so that's a weakness. But in terms of completing the tasks, the writer has completed all the tasks. They have 2 main ideas, they have explained their position, they have given reasons why they prefer their choice, and they have done it in a tone that is formal enough, but also not unfriendly. So I would say the task fulfillment is quite effective. The first paragraph goes a little bit off topic, I would say. And some of you are kind of noticing that. It's a little bit too focused on the general idea of how much vacation time employees get, and it's a little bit not focused enough on the specific question, which is, we're going to take away 2 vacation days and we're going to give you this job training in a nice place. It's really sort of a little bit general and a little bit not focused on the topic. And again, more detail about the training. What kind of job training is it? Where is it going to be taking place? Why is it going to be enjoyable to have this job training there? He does mention improving our skills, but that's really not very specific. We don't know what kind of skills, what kind of training, what kind of company. We know really nothing about the situation that isn't already in the question. So vocabulary and formatting are quite strong, but in terms of developing clear and precise ideas, there's room for improvement here. So Elena's saying, could I suggest rewriting the opening sentence? Yeah, I think you could keep the sentence and you could just fix the grammar. So you could say, I second your suggestion to reduce the number of vacation days and send us for training instead. No, we don't want training. That's very strange. So it's just little mistakes, but they're just unfortunately many of them in that one sentence, and then he does get better. Darren's saying, if I were to rate this response, what would I give it? Well, I haven't really thought about it. I think I would probably do very much like what the rater actually did. When I first started reading it, I was thinking, how did this get a 10? Because the first sentence was quite grammatically poor, but the writer did improve. I think if it's a 10, it's a low 10. There's always a range, and I would call this a low 10 for sure. I wouldn't say it's the strongest 10 I've ever seen, but in terms of vocabulary, in terms of sentence structure, definitely it's doing a good job. And so even though I do think that it could be more specific, and I would like the person to clean up their grammar a little, especially at the beginning, I don't have any major huge complaints. I don't have any huge disagreement with the rater. So I will agree that it's a 10, and I will say this writer probably could have done better. Okay, we have a new sample here, so I'm going to give you a minute and let you read it and let me know what you think, strengths, weaknesses, and guess the level if you would like to. Okay, ideas are starting to come in. The ratings that you're suggesting are all between 6 and 8. And I will tell you, most of you are suggesting 7, and the actual rating was an 8, and I will say it's a very low 8. Like, just factually, I've seen the numbers. This is on the low side of 8, right? So, and mostly what you're noticing, especially at the beginning, is that it's kind of starting in the middle. It's really not, there's no introduction here. And that has an impact on coherence. When somebody seems to be starting in the middle of an idea, even starting with the word because, which usually comes in the middle of a sentence, it's very confusing. It takes a long time for a reader to figure out what is happening, and you don't want that to be the reaction that the rater has. Would anyone like to suggest a better beginning sentence for this response? This response has no introduction. And how would you start it? What would be a good first sentence? In general, yeah, Elena's suggesting stating your side, answer the question, of course, yeah. So absolutely, start your task 2 response by stating your opinion. This person hasn't done that. They've explained why they have the opinion they have, but they haven't actually given their opinion. So that's a big deal. Some of you are suggesting to say something like both options have advantages, but I will say you don't need to say that because both options have advantages always. That's kind of the situation where it's an opinion question. Some people prefer one, some people prefer the other. They both have strengths and weaknesses that we all kind of understand that already. So I would start with a sentence that's focused on the question a little bit more closely. I would start by choosing the option that I prefer. That's really what I would do in my first sentence, and preferably I would do that in my own words. I would explain it in my own words and not just copy it from the question. So that's kind of what this person has missed. Now, that is a big weakness, and that has an impact, especially in the first dimension, which is coherence and content. However, we do have some strengths here too, and some of you have noticed that. So we do have two main ideas. The organization's pretty clear. The ideas are developed adequately, not beautifully, but well enough. Some of the vocabulary is clear and precise and natural, like much needed. Neither of those words is a high-level word, but much needed is a very common phrase in English that is exactly what this person wants to say. Mental rest, working environment, we have lots of phrases here that are quite clear and precise. And the tone, of course, is appropriate. There's nothing inappropriate. There's nothing here that's too formal or too casual for the most part. Weaknesses, many of you are citing readability, and I agree that, first of all, not choosing an option has a big impact, and also we don't really have a conclusion either, for that matter. We do have quite a few grammar errors. We have a lot of sentences starting with things like so and because that really shouldn't be happening. And that is creating issues with flow. That's making the response start and stop in a way that's not natural and isn't very fluid. It doesn't read well. We do have some repetition in the last couple sentences. What I really need right now is to enjoy some time out of working environment, and extra vacation days would be a great choice for me right now. Really, that's the same idea twice. And that also could be expressed in a single sentence without the and starting a new sentence. So again, this is an 8. This is a weak 8. This person was lucky to get an 8 for this. And I think vocabulary is probably what pushed them over, and also tone and task fulfillment. In terms of readability, in terms of coherence and meaning, they could have done more and probably could have done better if they'd paid more attention to those things. Okay, we're going to take a closer look at one more response for task 2. So again, I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to read this one, and this one's going to stay on the screen for our whole discussion. So if you don't get through it all, it's okay. We're going to go dimension by dimension, and then we'll talk about the level. So I'll just give you 30 seconds to quietly read, and then we'll keep going. Okay, we will keep going. And it's still on the screen now. We switched slide, but your response is still there. And while you're continuing to read, I see a question from Yi who's asking, do we have to use an email format to respond to a survey? And the answer is no. Some people do choose to write their survey responses as an email because they're more comfortable with that structure. They just want to make sure that they have a structure, and that's fine. So this person has done that. They have chosen to write it as an email. You don't have to. You don't have to have a greeting, and you don't have to have a sign-off. So it's really up to you. If you just simply want to start by expressing your opinion and then giving those reasons and then having a concluding statement, that's totally fine. So it's up to you. A lot of people do it as an email. And if you do it as an email, make sure you're still focusing on giving your reasons. You don't need any email chit-chat. You don't need, hi, how are you? I hope you had a good weekend. You don't need any of that. Just really get right to answering the question and use the email format more as a structure than a content helper. Use it for helping you with structure. Okay, so we're going to start with content and coherence. So part 1, is the writer's purpose clear? What do we think? Is it clear what he is writing for, writing about? I'm seeing some yeses, a couple of maybe not right aways. I'm going to say absolutely. It's extremely clear. His very first sentence says, while I really appreciate your offer on the job training, I would like to keep the vacation policy for the following 3 reasons. So he's saying his opinion and he's saying, I'm going to explain why. I think that's extremely clear. I don't think he really could have done anything to be clearer in terms of his purpose. So part two, what strategies does the writer use to achieve coherence? And here I want to say this person is using transitions very deliberately. They have obviously learned that that helps to structure and organize your ideas, and that is exactly what they're doing. The following three reasons. Firstly is a fine transition to use in your first reason. And then secondly, and then finally, and then we have a conclusion, and I don't see any issues. So in terms of transitions and in terms of organization, I would say this person has done a great job. And they haven't used huge numbers of sophisticated vocabulary words or ideas or anything like that, but they've just done some things that really make this very readable and easy to follow. So that is helpful. Now, if we look at the supporting details, the ones that I have underlined are not very precise. So there are supporting details for each of the three reasons, and that's great. That's part of content and coherence. Do you have support? Do you develop your ideas? Do you have examples? And the answer is yes. However, we have some examples of ideas that are not very precise here. For example, vacation, which is personal time. Well, yes, that is what vacation means. Could you say a little more? Could you be a little more clear about what you're trying to get at with that point? In terms of the second idea, vacation time is when I spend the days building relationships, and then they will not like to see me less. I kind of understand what he's saying here, but I think there are more precise and clearer ways to express that, and you could use some details that are a little more specific. This is very general. This could apply to anybody. So say something a little more precise, a little more personal, and a little more vivid. This is very general information where I say, yeah, I understand, but I would like a little more information. This could go deeper. The third reason is the clearest reason, in my opinion. I don't see anything there that is making me want to ask for more. So it's developed a little more clearly. People are asking about the score, and I'll tell you the score at the end. I'm going to. Don't worry about it. I have not forgotten. So here we go. We're going to keep going to vocabulary. So first of all, we have two questions on the screen. We're going to do the same thing we did for our first example, where I'll show you the next slide that has some red and some green on it. So first, what do you think are some examples of good word choice, precise or natural? And number two, do you see any examples of imprecise or inaccurate? So if you're writing in suggestions, maybe just put a number one or a number two beside it so I know which one you're answering. Any good word choice in there? There's lots of good word choice in there. And Dorsa is suggesting that the word while in the first paragraph is a good example of precise or natural language, which I agree. It's a nice way of expressing disagreement in a very polite way while also acknowledging the other choice. Ling is suggesting appreciate and extension and converting. I agree with all of those as well. Those are very precise and natural. So in terms of imprecise or unnatural, when you're saying building relationships sounds strange. And I agree in that situation, yeah. We do have a phrase building relationships, and that's fine, but why are you building your relationship with your wife? It's a little bit strange, right? She's your wife. Like, I don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand the exact intention of using it in that context. So I agree. Yeah, so here's what I did. So again, the red is anything that may be a little bit imprecise or repetitive or unclear. And in green is where I think that it is particularly helpful or clear or natural. So I didn't highlight every single word one way or the other. I just chose the most, the examples that really stood out to me the most. In terms of the red stuff, most of it is either repeated words or words or phrases that have been taken from the question that could have been rephrased. And there is just a little bit too much of that, where he's said vacation and vacation policy and vacation time a little bit too often. And he has also used some unclear phrases like when I spend the days and they will not like to see me less. It's just a little bit unnatural and a little bit unclear. But for the most part, the vocabulary is good. I have more green than red, for sure. Better equipped will not only benefit me, but also the company. Converting, a more conducive environment away from distractions, a better fit. Some of that is very figurative and all of it is very clear and very natural to me. So I would say that everything you see in green has been chosen very well and is helping to support the writer's meaning. Arnaud, you're saying conducive environment is not very precise. Conducive environment is very precise to me. Conducive to learning, right? It makes it easier to learn, and it's a common phrase. I guess it's not common, but it's a well-known phrase in English. A conducive environment, an environment that helps you to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. So we've talked already about it being very easy to read this response, and we talked about that in terms of content and coherence. This writer has done a lot of things to make this response very readable and very fluent. It flows very nicely. So we've talked about that already, and I will just reiterate that the organization is excellent and the transitions are all helpful and the paragraphing is correct. And the spelling and punctuation are also correct. So in terms of readability, this response has a lot going for it. We do have some errors, and we do have some places where the grammar is a little bit less than natural or less than ideal. And I've underlined those there now. Your offer on the job training, I'm not entirely sure. Your offer of the job training. We have an expression in English, on the job training, which is something else. So that confused me a little bit, and it's just the wrong preposition. The vacation time is when I spend the days. You don't need any the in that phrase, and it's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's a little bit unnatural. It's too many words for what you're really trying to say. You don't need all of those words. Converting them, I underlined that word because the word them, to me, is closest to, in the previous sentence, my wife and children. And so when you say converting them into training, I'm thinking you're converting your wife and children into training. So this is just an example of something that is, it's a referent that's not quite working. That them is really supposed to be talking about the vacation days, but it's so far away from what it's trying to be referring to that it's actually confusing, and it's making you think that you're converting your wife and children into something. Now, I know that that's not what the person is trying to say, but I had to do the work of figuring that out, and that's not ideal. So it's a minor error, but it is certainly an error. Do we think that the writer followed all of the instructions? Did they answer all parts of the question? Did they do everything they're supposed to do? He definitely chooses an option. We know his choice. We know his reasons. He's explained why it's better than the other choice. And I would say all of the information is relevant. I would say that completeness could be a little better, right? It's not as developed, it's not as clear as we would like it to be. A perfect or level 12 or whatever you want to call it response would have details that are a little more precise and clear, a little more development. So in terms of tone, I have some things underlined for question 3 that I think contribute to the tone. And I think this is an ideal tone for this task. It's friendly, it's respectful, it's formal, this writer is disagreeing with his boss, but he's not doing it in a way that is unkind or overly emotional or rude. He is making his points clear in a way that is respectful. And everything that you see underlined in red is contributing to that. So I think that he's done an excellent job with establishing a tone that works, but also disagreeing with his boss's opinion. And question 4, we've already talked about because some of you asked about that. Is it acceptable to write a task 2 response in email format? Yes, it is. Avoid that email chat. Avoid the sort of informal chit chat part of correspondence, and it's fine. And this person has definitely, it's clearly addressed to a particular person and he's talking specifically to that person, but everything he's saying is very relevant to the situation and it's not chit-chatty. So I would say absolutely for number 4, he's done a good job. Nanad, you're asking on my family. It is, yeah, hard on my family is okay. Something is hard on somebody, that means it's difficult for them. So it would be hard on my family is actually a very natural phrase there. Okay, so let's just finish up our discussion of task 2 with some points, and I want to kind of race through these because a lot of these are exactly the same as the strategies for task 1. Writing is writing, and good grammar is good grammar, and great vocabulary is great vocabulary. So we don't have a lot of very specific tips for task 2 as opposed to task 1, but we have a few. So in terms of organization, I would say the main thing with task 2, make sure that you're starting or very, very soon into your response, expressing your opinion. Make sure you do that. Make your choice and make it clear which one you're arguing for before you start to give your reasons. And I would say ending with a concluding statement is also important so that you're showing that you are ending it because you want to end it and not because you ran out of time or something like that. Just show that you gave consideration to your structure. And transitions are going to help you to bridge the connections between ideas. Support, same as for task 1, brainstorm before you start writing. You have time for that. And so I think that that's very important. Try to support all of your main ideas with at least one concrete detail or example, something that can be imagined in the reader's mind. And also you can compare your choice to the other choice. Remember that you're stating a preference. And so really this response is a comparison, and something you can do is say why your choice is better, and you can say why the other choice wouldn't work or problems that it has that your choice doesn't. So you can support your ideas that way too. Vocabulary, same for task 1. Try to avoid overusing words and phrases from the question. We saw vacation and vacation time repeated and repeated in that previous example. Oh, I forgot to tell you, that was a level 9. I'm sorry. The one that we went through in detail is a level 9. So both of the task 1 and the task 2 that we spent the most time on, those are both level 9s. So I told you I was going to remember to tell you, and then I forgot to tell you. Grammar and formatting, pretty much the same as for task 1, and I added here the idea that for this one you probably want to avoid list form or point form. Some people, because it says give reasons, and I've seen responses where people literally will do bullet points and give like 5 or 6 reasons in a bullet point form list. I would say don't do that because it makes people not write in full sentences. It makes them not use transitions, not use paragraphing. A lot of things happen if you start to use point form where you're taking away your ability to show how you can use language. So use paragraph form, write in full sentences, and have a reasonable number of main ideas, like 2 or 3. You don't want to just list 7 or 8 reasons why your choice is better, because then you're not going to have time to develop them. Paragraphing is appropriate for task 2 as well. To have a thorough response, read the question and always state your choice right at the beginning. So we've already talked about that, and focusing on reasons as opposed to giving a lot of suggestions or describing something. That's going to be helpful. Spend your time giving reasons for your choice, and then occasional suggestions or descriptions as supporting details will be helpful, but they shouldn't be the focus of your response. With your tone, again, think about the audience who's going to be reading the survey. That will always appear in the question. And again, avoid being rude or sarcastic, and your tone will probably be fine. Don't write an essay. It's not an academic situation. It's not write an essay to your professor. That's not what this is. So avoid that. Respond to the question in the situation that is given. And proofreading, same as for task 1. Leave yourself a few minutes and take that time to look over your work. That is very important for everybody to do, regardless of level. Okay, so it is 11:30, and this is the time when the workshop, or sorry, the webinar is supposed to end. And so if anyone has to go, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to skip the workshop part. Just for time reasons. We just don't have time to do the full workshop it would go on forever. But everything from this workshop, so the original response that we would be looking at and all of the changes in all of the dimensions, everything there is included in your study pack. And so you'll be able to look through it on your own. It's something that you can do by yourself. I've made some changes by dimension for you. So don't worry that we're going to skip this, because you're going to have all of that information in about an hour, and you can spend as much time on it as you like. So I'm going to go straight to our CELPIP study products, because I want to make sure for some of you who are preparing for the test that you have time to go through those with me. Blah, blah, blah. All of this is in your study pack. Okay, so study materials. We'll go straight to that. First of all, you probably already know about the sample test that is available through the website to everyone. Everybody sort of finds that very quickly. And I'll let you know, in case you're not aware, that there is a second complete practice test that you will receive automatically once you create a CELPIP account. So go online, enter your information, boom, you're going to have a second practice test in there. That's a totally different one. So there really are 2 free practice tests available to you. We also have our webinars that many of you are aware of and have attended a lot of. So we have CELPIP Get the Facts running twice a month, and that is just an overview. It's a very general overview of the main features of the test, so not a lot of time spent on specific parts, just a general look at the structure and format. We have Writing Pro Target 5, which everybody is welcome to attend regardless of level. It is focused on kind of the basics, the steps to writing an email or writing a survey response, and we look at some sample responses as well, but they are lower level sample responses than the ones that we had today. We have the same kind of thing for speaking. We have Speaking Pro Target 5, which goes through all 8 tasks on the speaking test and gives suggestions for bumping your speaking up to a level 5 for those who are looking for that, which is quite a lot of people. And then we also have Speaking Pro Target 9, which is 2 lessons. So you can sign up for both of them. Each one is 2 hours, and one goes through speaking tasks 1 to 4, and then the next one goes through 5 to 8. And that one, like this one, is focused on achieving a level 9. So it will go into a little more detail about strategies to push your pretty good English up to even an advanced level for speaking, and some strategies that will help you with that. All of these webinars are free, and they are all available on our website. You can register for them at your convenience. And the website in general, I will say, is a very good source of information. So if you have questions about, for example, test day, or what's your score report going to look like, or general strategies for preparation, that's all on the website. It's all there. And so I would say take a tour of the website if you have a lot of questions, and it will probably help you out a lot. In terms of paid materials, we have our CELPIP practice tests. We have 7 sets of practice tests, and each set has 2 tests in it. So altogether, we have 14 practice tests that are different. And they have all of the features that you are seeing on your screen now. So they will, each set has one test that includes sample responses for writing and speaking. If that is of interest to you, you have answer keys that will tell you the correct answer as well as the choice that you made, so you can make those comparisons. And the listening transcripts are included as well for anyone who is looking to practice listening a little more. Online stuff in terms of study materials, if you like to use your computer to study, CELPIP Accelerate is a great choice. We have two different programs. One is reading and writing, one is listening and speaking. You get a discount if you buy both of them. They are very much video based. So if you like to learn online, if you like to learn through videos and watching somebody demonstrate things or explain things on a screen, then this is probably a good product for you. Tons and tons of videos are included, as well as some other practice, including quizzes and sample responses and worksheets, but it's very much a sort of video-based program. Practice and analysis is like CELPIP Accelerate. It's designed around a practice test, one single practice test, but it's really more text-based. So if you're like me and you like to learn more by reading than by watching videos, that one might be a better choice. So it will explain a lot of the same stuff, but it'll just do it in different ways. It'll do it mostly by text, and it has thorough analysis of every question and answer, so you can really understand why this choice is correct, why the other choices aren't. A few more books here we have. If you're interested, we have study guides, which together are built around one complete practice test. And then we have the CELPIP focus books, which are not based on one complete test. They contain questions and examples and activities from a whole variety of tests. Each of those has a reading, writing book, and then a listening and speaking book. And we do that because some people are just taking the listening and speaking test, so they don't need all of the information. They just need the listening and speaking. So a lot of our products are divided up that way. If you're doing Writing Pro, you probably are not doing the listening and speaking test, so you might be more interested in the reading and writing guides. Finally, we have books on common errors and on vocabulary, and the errors book in particular is quite focused on writing errors. So if you are looking for a handy little guide to that, that might be something to look into as well. Lastly, I will mention, because some of you are probably at or past the stage where your English is good enough to apply for a Canadian university or college. And if you are interested in doing that, we have a test for applying to universities, an academic English test, which is called the CALE-CE. CE stands for Computer Edition, so it's another test that is done all on the computer. It's an academic test, so it's harder than CELPIP, basically, is what that means. The language is at an academic level. It's at a first-year undergraduate level. We also have many, many free webinars for the CALE if you're interested in checking that out and getting a sense of it. And every major Canadian college and university accepts CALE results, so that is another choice for demonstrating your English proficiency for academic purposes. And finally, here is our contact information. So if you need to get in touch, this is how to do it. And just a reminder before I go that the video for today's session is going to be attached to your follow-up email, so you'll be able to review it if you like. You will also get your study pack, which includes every sample response that we talked about today and all of the material from the workshop that we didn't get to. So that's all going to be arriving for you in a little bit less than an hour. And I can stay for a few minutes. I'm officially done, but if anyone has further questions or comments, I will definitely stay on the line and try to help. For anyone who is ready to go or needs to leave, thank you very much for your participation, and thank you for all of your responses and all of your comments and questions and ideas. Hopefully this was helpful, and if you have a test coming up, best of luck. And anyone who does have further comments, I'm going to stay on for just a couple minutes and make sure I got to all of them, and then we will officially end. So thanks all, and have a great day.